All right. I mean, this book was originally published in 1965, so of course, the bad guys are Russian. I mean, not literally Russian, obviously. As we established, this takes place on another planet and blah blah blah. But they're Russian, quote unquote. Okay. The point is, this is the second chapter of the book, and we now meet the story's villains, or at least the antagonists, as this is kind of a complex story, so it's not that simple about like heroes and villains, although it kind of is. But the Harkonnens, the House of Harkonnen, led by the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. You see what I'm saying? So that's the thing. That's what happens in what I read today, which was an intriguing introduction to the villains. There is a lot of familial politics, if you will. You've got Vladimir Harkonnen, who is the Baron, and he's not the. He's kind of an underboss in a way. At least that's the implication in a certain sense. But, he's powerful enough, and he's got his nephew, who is Fade Rautha, right? And he very, very clearly, he makes it clear that he's using his nephew, and there is his what do they refer to as? He has his mentat, okay, mentat, that's what it is. I guess that means like his advisor, his consigliere, however you want to look at it. This guy named Peter, spelled Piter, but I guess it's Peter. I don't think it's Piter. I don't know. Okay, but the point is, we've got here. We meet the Harkonnens, and we get a sense of their plan. Their plan is to assassinate Duke Leto Atreides, who, up until this point, we haven't actually met him, but we've heard a lot about him. We know he's Paul's father. We know, we know he's important. Okay, Duke Leto Atreides. We have not actually met him, but he's an important figure, and clearly this chapter now establishes the clear rivalry, let's say, between the Harkonnens, House Harkonnen, and House of Atreides, and how this is all very political and very, it's we're looking at a story, like at a sci-fi adventure story, which has a very strong socio-political undercurrent, which makes sense, given the epigraph. That how this opened with a certain epigraph, and then you look at the way things have been established, and here we kind of see that the whole conflict revolves, apparently, it seems to be revolving around the Shom Company. Shom, Chom. The Shom Company, and it's about who controls that, and obviously I am to understand that this is a mining company that mines spice. Now, here's the part where I have to be I have to be honest. Some of this I kind of know because I've seen the movie. And I know I said that I wasn't going to let that influence me, but it's difficult for it not to influence me a little bit. And that's a concern, because let's say I had not seen the movie. So at this point, I still wouldn't be sure what this is all about. But since I have some background information about this story, I'm sort of going, okay, yeah, right, the Shom Company, and this is the business. It's a business. It's all about those Shom directorships. They were the real evidence of political power in the Imperium, passing with the shifts of voting strength within the Landsraad as it balanced itself against the Emperor and his supporters. This is corporate/political intrigue, and that's what this all revolves around. And I think that's an interesting thing. Okay, people shit on George Lucas when in The Phantom Menace he starts with this whole thing about taxes and whatever else, and yeah, it's a weird thing to start like a swashbuckling sci-fi adventure story with something like that. And the original Star Wars trilogy did not have things like that, even though even the original Star Wars trilogy was somewhat informed by Dune and other works. So it's almost like George Lucas brought in this kind of stuff later, and since he hadn't baked it in from the beginning, it felt out of place. So it's very intriguing. The political intrigue, the socioeconomic thing, And then you get into the reality of this rivalry between the Harkonnens and the Atreides. So this goes back to what I was saying at the beginning about how they're Russians, right? I think that it's pretty clear that this sort of power play between House of Atreides and House Harkonnen is kind of a mirror to the Cold War. I think that that's an inevitable thing, and I think that it would make sense that Frank Herbert would be thinking about those things in the mid-'60s when he wrote this. So, I don't have any, I don't think that that's a problem at all. I think that what that happens when you do things like that in a science fiction story, you're grounding it in reality. You're grounding it in an identifiable place. The other thing that they're talking about in this chapter is, so we see the initial stages of an assassination plot against Duke Leto Atreides. There's an interesting detail in the way that they plant the assassination plot, where the implication is that somehow Lady Jessica, the Duke's concubine, that's an interesting thing, the Duke's concubine, not his wife, right? But Lady Jessica will be the one to somehow kill him. That's the plot. We don't know the details. We don't know exactly how that's going to happen, but we know that that's their plot, and that's very intriguing because Lady Jessica is Paul Atreides' mother, and you think to yourself, well, how's that going to work? And so much like the initial chapter, what this is doing is it's revealing some more plot details and stories slowly starting to build. And so I'm like, in analytical sense, I'm enjoying this. I appreciate the socio-political aspects. I appreciate the way it mirrors the global political sphere. The Harkonnens are shaping up to be interesting villains at this point. I like the fact that it's like this family, this twisted mafia family, very much about like loyalty. The book makes a big deal out of implying that the Baron Harkonnen, at the very least, is grotesque. He is described as being very rotund, and throughout the chapter he's never described. The implication is that he's talking from the shadows, and so as the chapter goes on, he's talking to his advisor, he's talking to his nephew, he's it's all, well, I don't know if he's his advisor, his mentat. He's talking to his mentat. He's talking to his nephew. He's discussing the plans, and then at the end of the chapter, finally he comes out of the shadows, and he doesn't step out of the shadows. He floats out of the shadows. Right? He's being suspended by some mechanical contraptions that allow him to float because his girth is so considerable that he cannot actually walk. His own 2 feet cannot sustain his body, and that's powerful imagery. And I use the word grotesque. Yeah, look, I'm not about fat shaming, okay? And I'm not even going to say that the book is engaging in that, although I guess to some degree it is. Yeah, so, again, 1965, it is what it is. It's an interesting trait. In these science fiction stories, adventure stories in general, it's always intriguing to give the villain certain characteristics. And it does make you think about that and about the psychological effects that can have on the reader, and then to varying degrees. I think it's an interesting thing to think about. That when we give villains physical characteristics that imply they are disabled in some way, or deformed, anything like that, right? It's a subtle and maybe unintentional, okay? Because I don't think that Frank Herbert deliberately wanted to engage in fat shaming. That's not what I think. But he wanted the villain to have a characteristic that made him repellent in some way, right? So I get that, and I just think it's an interesting thing to consider that when we do this and when we give our villains physical characteristics that exist in real life. Okay, it's not like he's this lizard person with horns and like a monster. No, as far as we're concerned, he's a humanoid being who just happens to be excessively rotund, excessively overweight, obese. The Baron moved out and away from the globe of Arrakis. As he emerged from the shadows, his figure took on dimension, grossly and immensely fat, and with subtle bulges beneath folds of his dark robes to reveal that all this fat was sustained partly by portable suspensors harnessed to his flesh. He might weigh 200 standard kilos in actuality, but his feet would carry no more than 50 of them. 200 kilos is about 400 pounds. That's a lot. However, there are people in life who weigh that. It's not abnormal. There are people who weigh 400 pounds, and yes, mobility is probably difficult for them, as other things might be difficult for them. I'm normally somebody who shies away from what can we call it? Outrage culture, right? I'm not someone who really engages in it. But here I am, sitting here now, reading this. It got me thinking. There was a scandal involving some movie in which Anne Hathaway played a witch. And, I think that... I haven't seen the movie, but I think that there was a problem because the witch is portrayed as having, like, a hand that only has, like, 3 fingers. So it's like kind of talon-shaped or something. And I think there was a kind of general outrage at people felt that they were treating deformity as this defect or whatever, and that was wrong. And you look at something like that and you go like, okay, but how many people have hands that are shaped like that? You know, I mean, you might as well complain about the Penguin in Batman Returns. But this is different. Okay, this is different. That's the point I'm trying to make. This is very specifically, he's just a very overweight man. And that is something common in society, especially American society. So, something to think about. You know, why do writers sometimes do this? And I do think that in many cases, and this is probably one of them, it's an unconscious thing. It's just because it's baked into us. You know, there are standards in society that are, a certain way, and it's just interesting. I'm not complaining about this. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying we should cancel Frank Herbert. I'm not saying we should cancel Dune. I'm not saying any of that, okay? I'm just making an observation. I want that to be very clear. It's just an observation. It got me thinking. And I am actually, think about it. I read this and it made me think about something, and that's good. That's why I would never say let's cancel this. No, I would say let's talk about this. Let's use this as a way to debate something. I don't know, for whatever reason at this particular point, okay, I was struck by how important it is that the villain be portrayed as grossly overweight. Okay? Just an interesting observation. Again, not something I'm complaining about, not something I'm against, not something, I understand the need to make a character interesting, visually compelling, all of these things, yes. And you want your villain to have a certain quality that makes him, that in your mind you envision something that is grotesque and frightening or whatever else. I get it. I get all that. But, just an interesting observation. And I don't know why it came at this particular point, but it did. It just made me think. And just something to think about. So, all right, okay, here we are, moving right along. I've made it 22 pages into the book. It's moving along. I'm doing it. Mentat.